Fillmore around?
He's floating somewhere.
Well, here we are, the evening of day 45. Welcome to the Utah Senate.
No one's counting, but there's only 3 hours left.
Less than 3.
If we go too much longer, Senator Van Tassel's hair will be completely red. So we look forward to some questions here tonight as we've concluded some pretty big bills this afternoon on tax reform. And we also passed our Medicaid expansion bill, seeking for some waivers. If you have any specific questions about those bills, we could probably bring the sponsors in and you can ask them questions on any details that are contained in those bills or any questions you have. We
Yes.
welcome those who are watching us over the internet. We welcome your questions also. We'll take media questions right now.
Well, I was wondering if maybe the sponsor of the big tax bill could come in and explain how regular taxpayers will see, what effect they will see from that?
Sure, we'll have, they're going to see Senator Fillmore and we could probably answer him, but he could answer them best. And then the detail. Any other questions or?
Yeah, aside from that part, that was a big bill, obviously, and it had the lowering of the rate, but
It's not as big as the bill that I passed in 2007. That had like 10 different taxes in it. So this was kind of a modest omnibus tax bill.
right. And so not to
Compared to the one in
wet
2007.
blanket or anything, but is it tax reform? Did we broaden the base? We lowered the rate? Yes. Did we broaden the base this year? I mean,
Well, we really didn't broaden the base in the income tax. If we had gotten rid of deductions, federal reform did that for us. Federal reform broadened the base for us. We just lowered the rate to 4.95% for corporations and for individual taxpayers.
and then we did give the exemption if the Supreme Court rules in our favor. We've got the new money coming in and it's going out in a new exemption.
That's in a different bill. That was Senator Stevenson's bill.
I'm sorry, I'm doing an overall.
Oh, okay.
Not to, so we can just cover this bill and go back to
So let's do that.
session if you'd like.
Okay. Questions for Senator Fillmore on the tax reform bill? That was House Bill
House Bill 293.
3. Great.
We were looking for a kind of a rundown on how it would affect individual taxpayers.
Well, that's going to be hard to pinpoint because there were so many pieces of it, right? I mean, there was a property tax and an income tax piece. I think your average family is likely to see a modest reduction in their income tax, something between $50 and $100 for an average family, right? Depending on how many kids you have and things like that. But where that depends on what kind of home they own, right? So if their property is worth quite a bit, then they, and the rate freezes, they might pay a little bit more. Or if you have a modest home, then your increase on that would be a little bit less. I would predict that most single family, you got a decent income, you live in kind of an average home, you're likely to see a small tax increase in the first year. Tax decrease in the first year.
Okay.
Because the increase in property taxes through the statewide levy, if you have a lot of property or you're a company that is in property intensive, it's hard to predict what might be the benefit for you because we've given them single sales factor or triple weighted, whichever serves them best. And that could be a tax savings to them. But if you're are property intensive, you'll probably see a little bit of an increase.
What happens to the education funding deal if voters don't approve the gas tax increase in November?
All our information, this was the deal. So we would expect them to honor their end of the deal. But another thing I say is if the voters vote down a 10-cent gas tax increase, which is something around $120 to $130 million a year, and if I'm counting my vote and I just see they just rejected $100 million to education, I don't see how I could be successful going back to them, asking them to approve something that's 7 times that large.
So I was in the negotiations with them. There was no commitment that would pass, but if it doesn't pass, the deal still stands the way it is. Okay, that answer your question.
I think so.
How about for future years? I mean, was there any agreement to extend that out at all past,
Well,
2019?
no, the gas tax increases and it grows over future years, so that's what happens.
I mean, if it fails or even if it passes, then
No, I think there's a commitment to work with the education community. We've tended to do that over at least the period of time that I've been in the legislature. And so one of the aspects of our schools now that I think gets overlooked is the fact that we're taking 1.5% of the WPU plus the gas tax and putting it into a special fund. That fund has accountability. It ties back to school grading. And I think there's a lot of us that are really excited to see performance-based funding for education. This may be the start of it, and I think it's the beginning of some great metrics to be able to figure out how to fund education. So I don't see this as the end, I see it as the beginning. And I see some great work in the future, and I think they do too. So even though there's no commitment, I think it's almost a given that we're going to keep working together to try to help education.
I think it needs to be clear for the voters and the citizens that they are not voting for a tax increase. This is a ballot question, whether they favor a tax increase for gas tax or not favor. With a favor, the legislature still has to act in the next general session on that ballot question. And if the public has some favor, then I think that we have at least support, and hopefully the legislature at that point can raise the gas tax.
If I might have clarification, Mr. President, who writes the ballot initiative question?
Our staff will do that.
So it'll originate.
It may be in the.
It's actually in the bill, so
It's
the
in the
question
bill.
is already written,
It's in
and
the bill.
it's in HJR 20.
If they vote no, could the legislature enact it anyway?
Yes,
Absolutely.
we need to. That's the problem with our tax structure is we're subsidizing roads. The gas tax only pays for about half the roads today. That's maintenance and operation and capacity. And we've been taking general funds out and subsidizing our roads. And so right now, if we're looking at user fees, we probably almost have to double the gas tax to overcome that and release those earmarks in the general fund. So that if you use the roads, you're paying for the roads through a gas tax. Politically, that would be very difficult for the legislature to do. But it is one of our fears that if the ballot question does not pass or we come back with an unfavorable result, it will be much more difficult for the legislature to do any kind of an increase.
Good tax policy is to try to connect the users to the fees they pay. So, or the fees to the user, those that use the system. So right now we're subsidizing at about $600 million a year out of general fund, our transportation, both new capacity and maintenance. So this will do a little bit of that balance and create more of a connection or nexus between the actual use of the facilities and what people pay.
As would tolling. So is that kind of this is like the short and midterm plan to get education or stop subsidizing roads, I guess you would say, and then if I guess the Transportation Commission tries to add more tolling on all roads, then that would help in future years? Is that kind of the plan that you guys?
Well, we've talked about this in press availability before, that at some point when, 20-25% of the vehicles on the road, if they're non-gasoline, we virtually made the gas tax obsolete. And you get a significant amount of cars on the road that are not paying for the road. We've got to find a different way to do it. And at least at this point, there are really only a couple of options, and they all have to do with electronic tolling or some kind of vehicle miles driven, which, I think they're closely related, both of those.
Going back to tax reform, at the beginning of this session, there was a lot, you're still talking about user fees, but you were talking about taxing services and streaming media and things. These things didn't quite materialize. Are there plans to do that, study that during the interim or come back to it next year?
We've studied the taxation on services, and 50% or more, I think at least a couple of years ago, 60% of the revenue that would be generated from taxation on services comes from medical services. And that's part of the reason why we haven't done that. And the problem with the base in the general fund or the sales tax is really not necessarily that it's still growing with taxes on goods and some services that we have. The problem is that we've been taking money out of the general fund and putting it in transportation. If you had $600 million back in the general fund that we could use for education, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. And so the structural problem is we're spending general fund monies on roads. That's the problem. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't have structural problems for education and so forth.
When do you see an electronic tolling system in place on most state roads?
I think that I think that unlike the HOV lane, I think that could come as soon as a couple years from now.
Yeah, wouldn't it be neat, instead of having to buy a transponder, you just pull into that lane at will, it clicks a picture of your license plate, and you get a bill. So you don't have to have a transponder, anybody can get in or out. And it's truly congestion pricing, that when the idea of congestion pricing is it's priced to maintain 55 to 60 mile an hour traffic in that lane. So as the traffic slows down, the price goes up, people move out or in according to what they want to pay. It's a pretty novel concept, but I think that would be very simple to do, and actually I think you'd get higher utilization.
And the good thing about it is you can't go in and out without paying. I know that's some people's pet peeve. It's that people that go into that lane and there's a single occupant in that vehicle, and the highway patrol aren't around, so they get off without paying in that lane. But this kind of tolling mechanism that we've set up this year will help us to enforce that better also.
So we have toll roads now, HOV lanes.
What about a user fee on education? Consider that?
Wow!
I'm just novel ideas,
Are you
right?
going to run for office?
Short campaign. Actually, an unrelated question.
So any other
There is, it's
specific
called the
questions?
income tax.
Is there any other specific questions for Senator Fillmore on the bill? Any detailed questions?
I just gave such a good presentation on the floor that
It
answered all the
was,
questions.
Very concise.
Very thorough.
Good job.
Can I ask about the Count My Vote? There's the two bills, the McKay and the McKell bill are both sitting there waiting on second reading. Do we have caucus positions on those two proposals at this point? Or
Not
is it going to be
yet.
a free-for-all?
We're
Probably going to go into caucus here in about 30 minutes to talk about those and a couple other bills.
Okay.
We've got a lot of bills left on the board, though, you know.
When's the bill of bills gonna come up?
I just sent the question over just a few minutes ago, and the answer was, we're working really hard. I really believe we'll be 11:30, probably before we see it.
Okay. What's the number going to be on that one? Are you the primary sponsor on bill of bills?
I am.
It's HB3, isn't it?
SB3.
That's good, thank you.
SB starts here.
You started, don't you?
We do.
Okay, watch for SB3.
We are here for the duration.
Yes, we are. Sounds like. Dang it.
I thought maybe, President, you'd throw me out when I came back with red hair.
Are you going to be on your skis
It
tomorrow?
matches your shirt.
I might see it in the morning, that's for sure.
Does that mean we're going to get out of here as close to midnight?
Usually when we get out of session, I try to go to work the next day, and I'd be sitting there working, falling asleep all day. So, might as well go skiing.
You just don't fall asleep.
I usually don't go, if I'm falling asleep while I'm skiing, I'm really tired.
Maybe a real trouble.
Oh, great, now we got to repeat everything.
So those who just came in, we have Senator Fillmore here to answer any questions you have specifically about the tax reform package that we passed. Any questions you have for Senator Fillmore?
Senator Fillmore, can you explain that bill in layman's I mean, in all seriousness, that bill contains what will probably be a property tax increase for a lot of people, a big corporate tax break, 28 million, and then it contains a tax cut. And what's the price tag on the tax cut?
About between 50 and 60 million. Like it starts at 52 and climbs up.
I'm sorry, we've covered all that before. You'll have to pick that up.
But how do you, what would you tell the average Utahn about how this benefits them? Because they're not getting a corporate tax break. They do get an income tax break, but they also get a property tax increase probably.
Yeah, and I think for most families, that's probably to end up, at least in the early stages, to be about a wash.
But why does it benefit them to have that then?
Well,
I think the biggest thing on it is yeah, for $120 million, we stop a $700 million tax increase.
so I was going to say, so we're increasing funding for education. We're particularly increasing funding for education for students that have the hardest time generating that money on their own, based simply because of where they live. Those are two big deals. But if you were to look at the $80 million tax increase that is coming to us as a result of federal tax reform and the potential $700 million increase, that's nearly $1,000 that an average family is going to pay in extra taxes. And I say nearly, I'm rounding up. It's a little over, it's like 800 and change dollars, right? Like that's a big deal. Under this scenario, it's going to be about a wash for a couple of years. As the property taxes compound over time, you know, the average family might pay between $50 to $100 more per year, like in year 5. But then at year 5, that property tax freeze goes away, and the rate starts again to fall down.
Does it fall or does it just stay at that?
No, the floor is set for 5 years.
Yeah.
After 5 years, the floor goes away, and the rate falls. I mean, I'm assuming that there's going to be appreciation in property values, right? So the one reason I had it's a little bit difficult to predict because I don't know what any specific family situation is, right? When you look at, if we're just cutting income taxes, you could say, well, we can look at people's income tax returns and say, you're getting, you know, this is how it would affect you. I mean, we could break that into taxpayers because we have all that data. But what we don't have is, what property do each of these people own as they file their tax returns? And so I can't say that for any specific family what it's going to be like. But for low-income families that don't get a big help on the income tax cut because they're not paying a lot of income taxes, we put in a circuit breaker to hold those people so that they would get a tax credit if they're on their property taxes if their income tax liability is too low to make a difference on the income tax.
So we talked before that the property tax portion is an equalization portion. And we talked that, generally speaking, property tax is capital used for buildings. But if you equalize it, you ought to be able to use it for operations. And that actually, and it's a dedicated source of revenue for the schools. When we take income tax, we can spend some of that income tax on higher ed. And so even though the income tax may go up, we may not spend it on K through 12. We may push it over to higher ed or push higher ed's money into another general fund expense. This is dedicated to them. We can't do that. It comes directly to the districts in a property tax, so they have total control over the money. It's more stable, more consistent, and it has that equalization portion. So overall, when you add that to the other things we're talking about, it's really great tax policy. And I think that's why the education community is so excited about it, because it's dedicated directly to them.
And stability for them.
Yes,
I
stability.
think you got to look at the elements individually. Your income taxes are going to go down. Your property taxes are going to go up slightly. If you're a company that has a lot of property and payroll here, but most of your sales are out of state, you're going to get a benefit. And we will be much more attractive to those type of companies because we're not penalizing you for being in Utah and having employees here. So this is the benefit with single sales factor for the citizens is employment. We'll be much more attractive to companies that would like to locate somewhere where they're not penalized for having a plant or an office and having employees. That's the beauty of that tax policy. So, I mean, it's really hard to identify without knowing everybody's situation, but those are the components and that's how it will affect people's lives.
Do we know how, if the property tax freeze will have any effect on home sales?
It's such a small amount, I don't think it would.
Negligible?
The Realtors Association, we're not opposing the bill.
What position will the legislature be in if the voters turn down the gas tax increase in November, and how does that affect the overall funding package for education you're putting together here?
We talked about that just a moment ago.
I was late.
It's a ballot question, so we'll go over this again. It's a ballot question. It doesn't raise gasoline tax. And if they're favorable, we'll hear about it. And if it's unfavorable, we'll know about it. After the election in November, the legislature will have to come back in with that information and now either raise the gas tax or do nothing with the gas tax. And we can do that regardless of what the outcome is with the ballot question, but it's going to be harder if they turn it down. In fact, I think a lot of people would feel like the people have spoken. And sadly, that's where we need to fix our structural imbalance, is getting more use, focusing our tax effort on a user. You use it, the roads, you pay for the roads type of basis.
And if the public, I think, turns it down, it really puts a double whammy, if you will, on the legislature to have to address what is agreed to and have to address that issue.
But let's focus on the positive. If they approve it, it's better tax policy, and think of what it does for the future of the state, both in able to free up that transportation money for education.
But just to be clear, under the terms of the agreement with our schools now, all the legislature agreed to do was put that ballot question out there, not to follow through no matter what.
Correct. They've got the same responsibility they had with their initiative to pass it. If it doesn't pass, our deal still stands, and we've done what we agreed to do, and the risk of the voters is, I think, their risk.
Was there a discussion about skipping the voters and just doing it all this session?
We talked about it late in the session, but it's just that it was too late.
The property rate freeze after 5 years, it's instead of dropping gradually, it's frozen. So after 5 years, what's stopping it from just shooting down to where it would be?
It would just be subject to the same truth and taxation laws that exist now, right? So you'd have a floor, it would be here at 0016, and then after the 5 years are over, it would fall commensurate with appreciation in the value of property.
And the bill also has a 5-year look and review, right?
Yeah, at the 5-year mark, we just, the Public Education Committee looks at this, it's like, is this generating the kind of money we thought it would? Are we using it the way we thought it would? Is this money that we're putting into this accountability fund, is that working the way we thought it would? And then we can get recommendations on how we could go forward. Having data from actual use, that's a great way to make decisions up here.
I think part of your question, though, is will it lose all of what we gained? Not unless the legislature acts. It will, the certified rate, that's the type of system we have here, will just adjust based on inflation. Any kind of other adjustment, we would have to actually lower it to take away what had been gained. And at that point, that would be very difficult for a legislature to not accept that there's been some inflation in that, because certified rate doesn't even adjust for inflation. That's been part of our problem over the years. We have a question from those who are watching.
This viewer asked, how will today's Medicaid expansion affect our taxes?
Had a zero fiscal, so it had no economic cost to the citizens of the state right now. I think that was it.
It's a great question. We already have appropriated money that would be used for that Medicaid expansion. And the difference in what we've done before a Medicaid expansion versus the bill that we passed today is that under our current Medicaid expansion, we have to come up with 30% of the cost, while the federal government comes up with 70. Under this new expansion, we would only have to come up with 10% of the cost, and the federal government comes up with 90. And so it actually, even though more people are covered, it's about the same amount of money out of our budget.
Remember one thing, there's no guarantee that anything will go forward because of the waivers.
If we don't get the.
This is all predicated upon waivers and not predicated upon really being able to do anything.
Any other questions?
You considered some bills this session kind of asserting legislative power with, the ability to declare something special. I know that has to go to the voters and that, but what prompted the need to consider those types of bills in this session?
Well, I think it was highlighted a little bit about some of the discussion we had last summer. The legislature felt frustrated that we felt it was our prerogative to set the course of a special election, and I think that highlighted part of the reason why we have this kind of a bill this session. But there are times when I think we wished we could come in and solve some problems and not just have to go to the governor. Although, I think we'd be very reticent about doing that. We don't want to become a full-time legislature. And hopefully we would avoid that kind of a temptation.
Did you pass the bill to be able to intervene in court cases? Is that passed here in the Senate?
Yeah.
I think we did. Yeah.
We have the sponsor here.
What about that? The governor's thinking seriously about vetoing that bill.
There's a lot of confusion on that bill. There's the comment that the Attorney General had about whether it's constitutional. We don't take away any of the Attorney General's responsibility or obligation to defend the state. We simply allow us to be able to enter in and help. And I've mentioned before that two eyes are better than one. It's actually, and many times, you'll notice we passed a lot of bills. All those bills are crafted with I suppose, a perspective if they're challenged is how they might be defended. And many times, if somebody takes a different route than how they were crafted, it diminishes the chances and the probability of success. So if we have our legislative council defending the bills they crafted, more highly probable of success, and that's just the concept. That the AG still has the constitutional right, the obligation to defend, but to have another alternative idea that may succeed. I think we that pass the bills think that the bills are a good idea, and we surely want them to be defended and they want the right to be able to help in that process, even though some people might think it's unconstitutional. So, if the governor vetoes it, we'll see what we do with it.
You'll assert your power.
You might see that happen. We're no prediction right now, though.
You feel overall you're on the same footing as the executive branch? I mean, there's some thought on the House side that the legislature's thought of a lesser branch because you only session for 45 years and no one cares what you do outside of those 45 years, 45 days.
It just feels
Especially in us.
So, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so there's some feeling that you're a lesser branch of government because you only meet for 45 days throughout the year. You're not on equal footing with the executive branch or even the judicial branch. What are your thoughts about that?
They're designed to be equal and balanced with cross checks on each other, but there's a constant effort to assert our position and to do what we feel is best and to try to suppress any type of usurpation of our power, and that's natural. That was the beauty of this, is that we would try to assert to our fullest ability, and the executive branch would do it to their fullest ability, and the judicial branch to their fullest ability, and where there was conflicts, there would be checks and balances.
The separation of powers is a very important piece. And I think here in the legislature, we take that seriously, even though we're limited and the amount of time that we have to spend in session to deal with the issues of state, I think you can take over at least the last 20 years, we have asserted even more power than was probably exercised previously in our history. To be that we just responded to the governor's budget. Now, we set the priority of the budget, which is our job to do. And we've taken that power amongst ourselves, amongst our bodies, to really enforce the fact that we are the budget makers in the state of Utah.
So if you believe money is power, then the legislative branch is the most powerful.
That's right. We're designed to carry the purse strings.
Did we have any other questions? Well, thanks everyone. It's been a great legislative session. We appreciated having our time with the media and for those who've been watching us. And, we'll see you next year. Thank you.
Thank you for doing these.
Thank you.
They're very helpful. They really are. Thank you.